This is really one of those phase shift moments where the, the flavor of the future will be determined by what we do, and the architecture of how people communicate for millennia to come will be influenced by this moment. And it really is one of those cases where people need to step up to their responsibility as ancestors and get this right. Originally I was a cattle rancher in Wyoming, which is something that I did for 20 years. And during that period, I was also writing songs for the Grateful Dead. And I became concerned about what was going to happen to community in America when little towns like Pinedale, Wyoming started to go away because there was no longer a family ranch economy to support them. And somebody suggested that I should take a look at the Deadheads as being kind of a new community form. Because I didn't think what was happening in suburbia or television land was going to be anything like as nutritionally substantial as the kind of community I experienced. And I couldn't really just go out in the parking lot and study the Deadheads because I was too big a deal. As soon as they found out who I was, then I wasn't getting a straight read. And somebody suggested that I get an internet account to visit Deadhead use groups. And I had no idea, this is in 1985, I had no idea what the internet was or a use group or anything like that. But my friend at Stanford gave me an internet account, and I bought a 300 baud modem, and without any technical support managed to somehow get myself connected to the internet, which was, I look back and I wonder how I did that. Because I definitely did not know very much about computing. But I had, as I say, a religious experience upon encountering what was a very small online environment. I doubt there were 200,000 people in the world with email addresses. But I felt that what I was looking at was something that was profoundly different from anything that had happened in the history of the human race, and I wanted to be part of it. I'm excited about the future of the IP, of the transition to IP for a whole scad of reasons. Some of them philosophical and political, everything talking to everything, and everybody connected to everybody. But, just in the sort of more pedestrian sense, IP makes it possible to have a much more vivid experience delivered at a distance. One of the problems with people is that they can't be everywhere at once. I don't suppose they'd really like it if they could, but if you're going to have to be distant from something that you're trying to experience, I would rather have you be able to experience it with as much sensorial bandwidth as possible, with three-dimensional sound and really high resolution, and you can't do that with anything else besides IP. We have to come up with a way to make certain that those networks are open to all signal. We have to come up with something that will duplicate the naturally highly redundant internet architecture of packet transportation. And I'm not confident that we're going to be able to come up with a system that does this unless we're able to come in quite early in the current deregulation and IP conversion process and convince a variety of the stakeholders that it is actually in their best interests to create a competitive environment, and that it is actually in their long-term best interests not to view spectrum, broadcast spectrum, as though it were real estate, which is how it's presently being divided up. And that there are a number of things that would serve both the public interest and the interest of, say, AT&T or Verizon, that may not be readily perceptible to those larger institutions at this point. There is an interesting quality to bandwidth, which is it lends itself very well to an abundance model of pricing. That is to say, the more bandwidth you give people, the more they want. The more you got, the shorter it feels. And so trying to use a scarcity model is actually, not in your best interests. But if you're dealing with a large industrial organization that has been using a scarcity model on everything, since that's what Adam Smith told us to do, trying to get them to wrap their heads around the idea that abundance, that giving lots of bandwidth away is actually good for them is going to be a bit of a hard sell. Increasingly, you exist inside the nation of Google or inside the nation of Apple or inside the nation of Facebook. Well, all you have in the way of a constitution with Facebook is that you put a check mark in a box at the end of a whole bunch of gobbledygook that nobody, to my knowledge, has ever read. I mean, my guess is that even the lawyers at Facebook haven't read all of it. And that doesn't make you a citizen in the usual sense of the word. And I think that it can get even worse now because we are going to have these immensely powerful IP networks that are basically accountable to no one, and we have to see if we can't convey to them a practical conscience. What we were going to have to do was to figure out a way to convey rights in the absence of law, because the way in which rights generally work is that a government basically promises that it's not going to do terrible things to you because it has the ability to do terrible things to you. That's how rights work. And the problem is, if you're going to try to have completely unregulated forces that have no natural constituency and basically convey you nothing, how can you prevail upon those forces to behave properly, and how can you have rights within that? When we talk about switching the phone system over to IP, we're not talking about that in isolation from a whole bunch of other things. We're talking about the elimination of national boundaries. We're talking about the elimination of the nation state in many respects. We're talking about stuff that is just very difficult to contemplate. From the time I first got on this mission, I realized that what we were dealing with was a huge matrix of previously established habits of mind and understanding and law and practice and technology and everything else, that went all the way back to the time that Moses left Ur. I mean, that Abraham left Ur. I mean, it's like the difference between monotheism and pantheism in terms of the profoundness of this, the way in which power organizes itself. And yeah, we have existing systems that are based on existing understandings that have huge vested interests that are necessarily going to be in the way. And, it's not just asking them to give up power, it's asking them to give up everything they know and understand. What people need to be thinking about is all the technological things that they can do to create a system that gives them autonomy, that gives them choice, that gives them the ability to express themselves invisibly if they choose to. I think that people are going to have to be technologically creative, and fortunately, it seems like we have a generation of people under 30 that are just naturally so. I think that if we genuinely have HD audio, so that you really can feel the quality of somebody else's voice, especially if it's somebody that you're emotionally connected to, I think that could be a big deal. I mean, voice is huge, I think. And people have gotten pretty accustomed to to not getting much of the quality of voice that, when they're making a phone call that they get when they're having a conversation. If they could have the same kind of nuance and, sort of the body language of sound that you have in person, I think people might tend to use it differently. I had really a vision, and it was as though divine, that because of IP, there would be a time where we would create a space that every human being could be in, and we would have the capacity for all of humanity to talk to all of humanity, and for everybody who had any curiosity to know all that could be known about that.